Good evening, everyone. So, welcome to the today's lecture. So, we have Dr. Jason Neelis, is associate professor in the Department of Religion and Culture, Wilfrid Laurier University, Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. Dr. Neelis is author of Early Buddhist Transmission and Trade Networks, Mobility and Exchange within and beyond the northwestern borderlands of South Asia, Leiden, Boston, Brill, 2010. He conducted research on cross-cultural exchanges along intertwined networks for migration, trade, and religious and cultural transmission in northwestern borderlands of South Asia and beyond. Dr. Neelis currently directs a project on epigraphy and petroglyphic complexes in the upper Indus region of the northern Pakistan. He will be speaking today on capillary networks for long distance trade and cross-cultural transmission between South Asia and Central Asia. Our head of the department, Professor Seema Baba, will chair the talk. Seema ma'am, would you like to say a few words welcoming our distinguished speaker?
Thank you. I welcome Dr. Neelis to our seminar series, and I'm really looking forward to his talk, because he's, this is one area that we really don't talk about, and also petroglyphs is an area which is not really, it doesn't fall in art history. So we don't cover it in art history. It doesn't, a lot of archaeologists seem to ignore it because they consider it to be visual in character. So the talk today is going to be very interesting because a new source, including graffiti markings, petroglyphs, epigraphs, short epigraphs, and in the entire Chilas region and that region where there were a lot of trade and trading networks at work along with monastic exchanges. And I think that is something that we're all looking forward to hearing. So Professor Neelis, please.
Thank you, Professor Baba, for inviting me to participate in the seminar series for the history department at the University of Delhi. And thank you, Ashu, for a very nice introduction. Please accept my condolences for the passing of Professor B.P. Sahu, whose broad-ranging work on social and economic transformations using textual and epigraphic sources provides a model to be emulated. I'm honored to give this presentation for the History Department seminar at the University of Delhi. I aim to pay homage to the late Professor Sahu's intellectual legacy for the study of early Indian history by drawing upon thematic overlaps between his historiographical contributions and my own ongoing research into patterns of long-distance transmission of Buddhism and other religious cultural traditions and trade networks in regional contexts of the northwestern borderlands of South Asia. And Ashu introduced the book that I published about a dozen years ago. In Professor Sahu's work, he often emphasized, and I'm quoting him, the shaping of regions and their personalities in the larger context of trans-regional linkages, unquote. So that's where our work overlaps. In an address on historiography and research methodology entitled "When It Is Time for an Idea, Nodes, Networks, and the Shaping of the Idea of India in Early Medieval India," he discussed early medieval nodes, networks, confluences of cultures, and cultural overlaps, transmissions, and affinities. And he astutely observed that, and I'm quoting him again, the steady multicultural flows, localization of the trans-regional, and universalization of the local, our sub-regional ingredients, were unevenly spread and characterized by varied trajectories and chronologies across regions. Unquote. This presentation for the History Department series will focus on uneven patterns of long-distance flows between interacting nodes and capillary networks of the upper Indus region, which was connected to transregional arteries of Central Asia and South Asia, including ancient Odisha or modern day Orissa, which was the special subject of Professor Sahu's work, via the northern route, the Uttarapata, which I'll discuss in my presentation. So right now, let me just share my screen. Okay, and I will discuss in-progress research using advances in digital imaging techniques for studying epigraphic and petroglyphic sources, which Professor Bava introduced before I began speaking, in order to map routes through the Western Himalaya, the Karakoram, and the Hindu Kush Mountains, where significant clusters of sites on the upper Indus River are endangered by infrastructure projects and threats to tangible cultural heritage. So the image on the poster for my talk shows you the site of one of Talpan and the Indus River below. So these areas in the Chalas Plain extending a bit upriver from Talpan and Chalas will be inundated with the construction of a dam further downriver at the site of Basha in Diamir district of Gilgit-Baltistan province of northern Pakistan. So brief case studies of sites clustered in Gilgit-Baltistan province will be presented, drawing connections to Ladakh in northern India and the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang province of western China. I will argue that alternative models of long-distance transmission, rather than gradual diffusion, can best explain the kinds of uneven evidence from these everyday sorts of writing and images on rocks that Professor Sahu also drew attention to. Okay. So this map of the routes and nodes of the northern route, or Sanskrit Uttarapata, shows you how it was a shifting, our network of shifting arteries for commercial and cultural exchanges between the northwestern frontiers of modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan and the Ganga Yamuna Doab of northern India. The Sanskrit term Uttarapata, denoting lands in the north, extending from ancient Bactria and Central Asia, overlaps with its more specific etymological and probably original meaning as a trade route. The northern route was a broad collection of flexible itineraries on a loosely defined northwest to southeast axis, intertwined with multiple feeder routes. In my own understanding of the Uttarapata, as well as another network of arteries called the Dakshinapata, the southern route, was largely informed by a book published by Professor Nayanjot Lahiri on the archaeology of Indian trade routes in 1992. She was formerly a professor in the Department of History at Delhi University. Widespread distribution of northern black polished ware demonstrates continuities in material culture along the northern route since the middle of the first millennium BCE. Epigraphic sources indicate that road networks played significant roles in political administration, military conquest, and cross-cultural contact and exchange. As this audience is well aware, I'm sure, rock edicts and pillar inscriptions at important junctions of routes, including a pillar on the Delhi Ridge adjoining the campus location, which was shifted there from Mirat in UP, set up by the Ashokan, by the Mauryan ruler Ashoka, emphasized the importance of maintaining road networks and lauded facilities available for travelers. Although the northern route, or Uttarapata, is not explicitly mentioned, passages in the Second Major Rock Edict and in the Seventh Pillar Edict refer to excavation of wells, construction of rest houses, and planting of trees for both humans and animals traveling along these routes. Sets of Ashokan edicts at Shabasgarhi and Mansehra in ancient Ghandara and along routes leading to Kashmir, and at Dhauli and Jalgada in ancient Kalinga, where Ashoka led a disastrous invasion akin to the current invasion of Ukraine, for which he famously expressed regret in the 13th Major Rock Edict and endorsed campaigns of Dharma victory, Dhamma Vijaya, instead, demarcate Mauryan antipodal nodes of this imperial network. A report by Megasthenes, he was a Seleucid envoy to the Mauryan court around 300 BC, of a royal road leading to the capital city of Palibotra, that is to say Pataliputra, modern Patna in Bihar, with pillars to mark distances, is quoted by Strabo and served as a partial source for Pliny the Elder's account. As I've previously discussed elsewhere in an article on polyvalent perceptions of the Uttarapata in history for a volume with essays in memory of D.C. Sarkar, epigraphic sources and literary texts show that the geographical position and cultural orientation towards the Uttarapata fluctuated considerably. Drawing upon another cogent observation by Professor Sahu, who wrote, quote, "It is important to remember that in the course of transmission and adaptation in new cultures, the meanings and objects meanings of objects and characters often change and are interpreted to suit local requirements." I'll introduce another example of an epigraphical reference to the Uttarapata. This is one of the earliest explicit references I could find. It's in an inscription from Hatigumfa, that's to say ancient Odisha, by the Mahameghavahana ruler Kharavela, probably belonging to the late 1st century BC, who claims that he terrified the kings of Uttarapata. Although, and of course you have to understand that he's making that claim from the area of ancient Kalinga, right? So although the identity of these kings is not apparent due to the condition of the inscription, a mid-Gangetic geographical location is suggested by the context of Kharavela's campaigns against Magadha. That is to say, the area around Pataliputra, east of where the confluence of the Ganga and Yamuna is. Okay, from the other direction, a Bactrian inscription from Rabatak in northern Afghanistan, issued during the first reign of Kanishka, say the beginning of the 2nd century CE, or precisely 127 CE, according to the chronology of Harry Falk, proclaims that the Kushanas had submitted all India to their will. Normative textual traditions often express ambivalent perspectives towards the northern region and people. So the authors of the Dharma texts, the Dharma Sutras and Dharma Shastras, regarded areas west of where the Saraswati River disappears, basically in the Thar Desert of modern-day Rajasthan, and east of the confluence of the Ganga and Yamuna, south of the Himalayas and north of the Vindhyas, as outside of the narrower boundaries of Aryavarta and the middle country, or Madhya Desha. Now, as Professor Sahu observed, the boundaries of Aryavarta and likewise the Middle Country, as a cultural region, were not very sharply defined. They were both porous and flexible. Flexible insofar as it extended, that is to say, Aryavarta extended geographically and incorporated new regions within its ambit, such as Kalinga, and porous, because contrary to general perception, it was inclusive. Peoples and regions once considered outlying or perceived with hostility were amalgamated at another point. So that's the end of my quote of Professor Sahu's observation about the shifting kind of boundaries of Aryavarta. So from the viewpoint of Orthodox Brahmins, inhabitants of this region were stigmatized as impure due to foreign contact with people like the Kushans, or before them, the Indo-Parthians, or Indo-Scythians, the Shakas, are the Yavanas, the Indo-Greeks. And they were considered to be outside of Dharma Bahya. And this kind of idea that somehow they were polluted by this contact is carried on in the Mahabharata as well. On the other hand, Buddhist narratives include many episodes of merchants from Uttarapata engaged in long-distance trade, such as the story of the two brothers, Trapusha and Balaka, who became the first lay followers by offering alms to the Buddha just after he attained awakening. This is in the Lalitavistara and Mahavastu. Literary and epigraphic sources show that the geographical position and cultural perception of Uttarapata, or the northern route, or the North Country, fluctuated according to the perspective of the source. Recent discoveries of Buddhist manuscript collections in the Ghandari language, written in the Kharoshthi script, since the mid-1990s, demonstrate that regional literary culture flourished alongside distinctive visual and material cultures. So since the mid-1990s, there have been several collections of Ghandari manuscripts, including the kinds of fragments that you see here in the Skoyen collection with a provenance, or they were probably found in caves in the Bamiyan Valley in central Afghanistan. There are at least 5 other significant collections that have come to light since that time. Previous to the 1990s, we only had one manuscript of the Dharmapada in Ghandari, which was found near Khotan in the southern Tarim Basin of Xinjiang. This has been quite an advance now, because these Ghandari Buddhist manuscripts not only expand our understanding of early Buddhist literature, at least in terms of its written transmission, but these are our earliest South Asian manuscripts that are extant. They go back to dates from the 1st century BC on up to the 3rd century CE. So although most of these collections of manuscripts lack secure provenance, that is to say, we don't know where they came from because they didn't result from archaeological excavations, they reflect patterns of literary transmission between South Asia, Central Asia, and ultimately China. In addition to the early Ghandari manuscript collections, networks of Buddhist monastic scribes were also responsible for literary production of Buddhist Sanskrit manuscripts. So we had, in addition, most of the fragments in the Skoyen collection are actually in Brahmi, used for writing hybrid Sanskrit. But we also have an anthology of previous birth stories in a Brahmi hybrid manuscript from Merv in Turkmenistan, that is to say, in Western Central Asia. And of course, many of you are familiar with the large collection of Buddhist Sanskrit manuscripts from Gilgit, which date from periods from the late 6th century up to early 8th century CE. One example is given to you here from a British Library folio, but actually most of the Gilgit manuscripts are in the National Archives in Delhi. There are also Buddhist Sanskrit manuscripts from Khotan, Kucha, Torfan, and other sites around the Torfan Basin in Xinjiang. The distribution of these manuscripts from the first millennium CE shows that Buddhist missionary monks, nuns, and merchants utilized an extensive network of routes to travel beyond the borderlands of South Asia. Okay, so now I'm turning to the main focus of my talk, which is a network of capillary routes in the upper Indus region of northern Pakistan. So not the lower Indus, right? The famous Indus Valley civilization, which goes down to Sindh and includes parts of Punjab, Gujarat, and Haryana. What we're talking about is the upper Indus region where the Western Himalaya, the Karakoram, and the Hindu Kush mountain ranges come together at what's been called the Bame Dunya in Persian, the roof of the world. So it was in this region that a network of interconnected passageways directly linked the northern route, or Uttarapata, of South Asia with branches of the Silk routes in Eastern Central Asia. The German ethnologist Karl Yettmar noted, to quote him, that a shortcut between Central and South Asia was possible, partly compensating for the dangers and strains, unquote, of crossing through these mountains via the deep river valleys of the upper Indus River, as well as the Gilgit and the Hunza River, as well as passes, which were oftentimes covered in snow and glaciated throughout the year. So more than 50,000 rock drawings are petroglyphs, and 5,000 inscriptions demarcate routes through the mountain passes and river valleys of the upper Indus and its tributaries, which linked Buddhist centers in Ghandara via the Swat Valley, Kashmir, and Ladakh with the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang. Unlike modern traffic restricted to the Karakoram Highway between Pakistan and China, this highway was constructed in the 1980s. So this is what led to the discoveries of many of these complexes. Ancient travelers could choose their itineraries based on environmental, economic, political, and religious considerations. The vast collection of written and visual records demonstrates significant religious and cultural mobility in this high mountain region. So the site of Haldakish in the Hunza Valley functioned as a significant node in the network of capillary routes through the Karakoram Mountains. The so-called Sacred Rock of Hunza features rock drawings, which the site is depicted here. And in a little bit, I'll share a different screen with a kind of Pano Tour of the site starting from this viewpoint. But it gives you a sense of kind of the topographical and environmental situation. So this site features rock drawings of countless drawings of Capridi, capriti is kind of a generic term for, mountain goat, which includes the ibex, which is the namesake for the site, because the term is named after the male ibex, the Halden in Burushaski. But there are also almost 150 graffiti inscriptions in a range of writing systems that reflect a multicultural crossroads in a transit zone connecting the upper Indus region in the borderlands of South Asia with the southern Tarim Basin in Central Asia. So these slides show examples of the Ghandari graffiti written in the Kharoshthi script, which dates sometime from the 3rd century or earlier. You see also how the drawings of the mountain goats or ibexes overlap the earlier inscriptions in the Kharoshthi script in Ghandari language. There's also Brahmi inscriptions from around the 4th to 6th or 7th century. And there's even a Chinese inscription. And of course, you see here how the Chinese inscription incised into kind of the surface of the rock is overlapped by a drawing and a Brahmi inscription from the same time. But there are also Middle Iranian inscriptions in Sogdian and Bactrian, and also a very interesting Tibetan inscription. So I previously studied the inscriptions, which were first published by the Pakistani scholar Ahmad Hassan Dani in 1985 and 1987, while I was conducting epigraphical field research for my PhD dissertation in 1995 and 1996. I improved some readings of the Indian inscriptions written in Ghandari and hybrid Sanskrit based on a research visit in 2004 to the Heidelberg Academy for the Humanities and Sciences, where a research unit for rock drawings and inscriptions on the Karakoram Highway was maintained under the direction of the late archaeologist Harold Hauptmann until about 10 years ago. So as a result of Pakistani-German expeditions from the 1980s onward, several sites with inscriptions and petroglyphs have been published in volumes of the series Antiquities of Northern Pakistan and in the German series for materials for the archaeology of Northern Pakistan. I'll give those references a little bit later. In June and July of 2019, I was able to return to Hunza Haldakish with a research team from Lahore University of Management Sciences and Wilfrid Laurier University to apply digital imaging techniques. A virtual show and tell type presentation is intended to demonstrate how these techniques can be used to enhance the study of graffiti and petroglyphs as valuable sources for regional history and cultural heritage. So my first example is of a Pano Tour, and here I'll switch to another screen. Just a second. Okay, I think now you can probably see the Pano Tour, which is available through heritage360.pk. So this allows you, okay, so this allows you to basically navigate the site from different vantage points. So you could switch from this vantage point to another vantage point. Okay, so you see here how the site consists of 4 large rock outcroppings. And these Pano Tours are courtesy of Dr. Mortaza Taj at LUMS, whose heritage360.pk site hosts not only Pano Tours from Haldakish, but also from other complexes in Gilgit-Baltistan. In this technique, a DSLR camera with a fisheye lens is mounted on a tripod to take a series of pictures or panoramic photos. And here you see how you can rotate around through these stitched photos so you get a view of the Karakoram Highway, as well as the other parts of the site. This creates a kind of comprehensive overview. As Haldakish features 4 large rock outcroppings, virtual visitors can move around the site using points indicated on the map index. While the resulting images are not detailed enough to necessarily read the inscriptions, so here you see where some of the inscriptions are written on the rock, this first level of documentation effectively conveys the layout, topography, and physical environment, which helps to situate the epigraphical materials and petroglyphs in a vivid context. Okay, so I also wanted to discuss some of the other techniques. So hopefully now I'm back to sharing my PowerPoint slide.
Yes.
Okay, which not only include Pano touring, but also terrestrial LiDAR laser scanning using stationary scanner provided by LUMS. And then 2 other techniques we've been using quite a bit of are photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is a technique of taking photographs from different angles with DSLR cameras and then combining the 2D photos using software to make a composite 3D image. And then in the, you know, I have an example which I'll share now of what a photogrammetry model looks like. I have to go to another screen though to share that, okay? So let me share. Different screen. Yeah, I'll show a little bit more, but for right now, I'll share a snapshot of what you can do with a reflective transformation imaging. Unlike the photogrammetry model where the camera moves around the rock, with RTI, what happens is the camera stays in one place, but the light source moves around. So in other words, there's a flash, which is set up to reflect off the surface of the rock from different angles. And then using, again, a special kind of software, it's possible to match using this kind of where the point is on this kind of black reflective ball, where the you know, where the light source, the angle from which the light source is coming from. So rather than looking at, you know, many different black and white images, which I had to do when I was doing my field work, it's possible using this RTI, reflective transformation imaging technique, to kind of combine them together and manipulate the light source yourself in the output. Okay. Okay. So another significant site in Gilgit-Baltistan is the place where there is a confluence of of sites around the place where the Indus and the Gilgit River join together. So this is at a junction of routes. And maybe I'll stop the share and share my screen again to make sure I'm in the right place. Yep. Okay. All right. So this location is at a junction of regional routes that connect Gilgit with Baltistan via pathways through deep gorges of the Indus River to Skardu and with Kashmir across the Deosai Plateau. The upper Indus River also extends from Baltistan into Ladakh. And Ladakh is also very rich in rock drawings and inscriptions. And in fact, an Indo-French archaeological mission led by Lauriane Bruneau in collaboration with Martine Vernier and Indian colleagues has been collecting tens of thousands of petroglyphs from sites around Ladakh and also into Spiti to create a database of Himalayan rock art, which should be ready sometime this year. Okay, now most sites around the confluence and in the plateau above the upper Indus and Gilgit rivers are anepigraphic. That's to say that they don't have inscriptions. So on the plateau above the confluence, most of these drawings, most of these sites will be very simple rock drawings. And sometimes I get a little bit mixed up when I do this, but I just wanted to show you, this is the Gilgit River coming in and joining the Indus River here. And if it was a clear day, you would be able to see Nanga Parbat, one of the highest peaks in the Western Himalayan mountains in the distance. But this gives you a sense of what the layout is like. Okay. So I will pause that, move from there, and discuss the graffiti that is written, and maybe I'll just stop sharing that and get back to my main share. Okay. Written on the rocks that are close to Alam Bridge over the Gilgit River. These reflect patterns of long distance travel and Buddhist transmission. As the early editors of these graffiti inscriptions in Ghandari and hybrid Sanskrit, namely Gerard Fussmann and Helmut Humbach pointed out. Personal names and titles clearly indicate that many visitors were Buddhist travelers or local devotees. Approximately 20% of the personal names in Koroshti and Brahmi graffiti at Alam Bridge are composed of Buddhist naming elements. I like this example. In the year 9, Kshema Senu or Kshema Sena, the son of Dhammasena, arrived. Most of these graffiti are quite brief, but even with this brief inscription, you have a date, year 9. Probably year 9 belongs to the Kanishka era, whether or not the hundreds are omitted. And then you see there is a naming element where you can recognize Indic names like Sena, right? But here it's mixed. It's composed also of the Buddhist naming element, Dhamma or Dharma, so that from the names, you can glean something about the linguistic and social and religious / cultural history as well. Okay. Other examples of Buddhist titles in Brahmi graffiti Alam Bridge include a novice, a master of monastic law, a Vinayadhara, and a Shakya bhikshu, a Shakya monk, which oftentimes indicates a Mahayana affiliation. Brahmi graffiti recording the visits of Palolaja bhikshus, that is to say, Palola monks, were written by people with regional ethnonyms, since Gilgit and the surrounding valleys were ruled by the dynasty of the Palola Shahis until the early 8th century. It's difficult to see in this black and white photo. I should have used a better one, but in this inscription, a Buddhist traveler named Sanghaburi declared that he came for the 1,000 Buddhists, which suggests that his destination was a shrine of the 1,000 Buddhas at Mogao, at the Mogao Caves outside of Dunhuang, are another site in the Tarim Basin of Xinjiang. Proceeding downriver from the confluence of the Gilgit River and the Indus River, several graffiti and petroglyph complexes are located at crossing points, with many impressive Buddhist petroglyphs concentrated near the modern bridge between Chelas and Talpan. So that's the image that appears on the flyer for this talk. Donative inscriptions in Brahmi frequently identify Buddhist petroglyphs of stupas, that's to say monuments, where the mortuary remains of the Buddha, of the Buddha's body, his sharira, were interred. But these are, of course, drawings of these architectural forms of the stupas. But while that is the main Buddhist motif, there are also some examples of narrative scenes and portraits of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that are oftentimes labeled as religious offerings. In Sanskrit, it would be Deya Dharma. The term that's oftentimes used here is Deva Dharma. The epigraphic formula of donation and veneration commemorated the gifts of rock images, which created opportunities for other devotees to worship. So by writing their names next to these images, visitors and local devotees ensured that the merit continued to accumulate for themselves and for the beneficiaries of their acts. So this is a stupa drawing in the center. And on one side of it is a narrative image of the Vyagri Jataka. This is the story in which the Bodhisattva, who you see here lying down after throwing himself from a promontory, is being, he's offered his body as a gift to feed the hungry tigress, the Vyagri, and her cubs. And it's interesting because the donor, Kubera Vahana, is also depicted, right? Kneeling down and labeled with a Brahmi inscription on one side of the stupa, and on the other side of the stupa is a teacher, his acharya, Mitragupta. Okay, now also at the site of Chelas Bridge, where this set of drawings is located, you also have drawings that are donated by another prominent local patron of figures like Maitreya and Avalokiteshvara, which are labeled with the Brahmi inscriptions. This one says that the stupa is a Deva Dharma of Singhota, together with Gamaneshwara. Gamaneshwara, sorry. Other inscriptions denote homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas associated with Mahayana, such as Amitabha, Akshobhya, Prabhutaratna, and Ratnashikan, as well as the worship of previous Buddhas like Vipashian. In lieu of erecting and supporting residential monasteries for Buddhist monks and nuns, local donors and travelers along the network of routes established wayside shrines by drawing images on rocks and writing their names in graffiti inscriptions. Now, this point may need to be qualified because recently Pakistani archaeologist Mohammed Zahir has found surface remains which in Talpan across the river from Chilas, which may indicate that there was a Buddhist monastic establishment there. At the site of Chilas II, which is a short distance downstream from Chilas Bridge, there are about 60 Ghandari graffiti belonging to periods, again, from the 1st to 3rd centuries that accompany petroglyphs of Buddhist monks and horsemen venerating stupas, but also images of Krishna Vasudeva and Balarama. So that's what's labeled here in these images of Balarama, ours is labeled Baladeva, holding a plow. And then we also have a Vasudeva labeled here, right? Holding the disc, so Vasudeva Krishna. And in terms of Razi's observation before the talk began, yeah, you can see the different layers of more recent graffiti in Urdu, as well as other drawings, right? Simple drawings of the mountain goats, as well as stupa type figures, all kind of written in the same area. So iconographic motifs connected with Buddhist, Hindu, and indigenous traditions shed light on the multiple religious proclivities of visitors to this place that may have served as an encampment while waiting to cross the river, which was apparently not an exclusively Buddhist shrine. Okay, so my team for the project has been working at sites from Chilas 2 on downriver to Gichinala. And what they've been doing is they've been generating point clouds from the laser scans, which can then be animated for fly-through videos. So I just wanted to show you an example of how this fly-through video can work at the site of Chilas 6, which is between Chilas 2 and Gichinala. And there, because this kind of gives you an idea of the mixture of Brahmi graffiti inscriptions. You see them here written on the rock. So instead of just looking at a 2D image of an inscription or a petroglyph together or by themselves, you get a sense of kind of the layout by moving around from rocks with stupa drawings to other types of drawings. I think if I advance this quite a bit more to around the 6-minute mark, I can bring you to an interesting petroglyph of a kind of giant figure that that may date to a very early layer of prehistoric times. Anyway, I'm not going to be able to show you that because I realize my time is running out, but I just wanted to show you that example. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'll share my screen again. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, many are actually all of these sites extending from what we've provisionally labeled, zone 1 near the site where the Basha DMR dam is being constructed on downriver or upriver on the Indus to say zone 5, where the sites of Gichinala and Chilas 2 to 6 are located, and across the river to Talpan, where the team is currently working, are projected to be submerged in a large basin that will be created when the dam is built. So over the next 5 years, we will be going zone by zone, site by site, rock by rock, inscription by inscription, and petroglyph, and drawing by drawing, to create a kind of 3D digital model of these sites in the various zones. So that there is so this enhances the kind of documentation that's already been published in these series of Antiquities of Northern Pakistan and German Materialien zur Archäologie der Nordgebiete Pakistans too. Okay, so a final example that I wanted to show is from the site of Shatial Bridge, which was published as volume 2 in the German Materials for the Archaeology of Northern Pakistan series by Dita Bandini Koenig and Gerard Fussmann, with contributions of the readings of the Brahmi inscriptions by Oscar von Hinhuber and the Middle Iranian inscriptions by Nicholas Sims Williams. Okay. So this site of Shatial Bridge was located about 60 kilometers downstream from Chilas, or is located about 60 kilometers downstream from Chilas, at a kind of critical fulcrum in the network of capillary routes between South Asia and Central Asia. The unique concentration of Iranian and Indian graffiti, as well as fascinating petroglyphs, have been documented by scholars like Gerard Fussmann, whose article on this triptych, which shows, a central stupa surrounded by names of various visitors, as well as some of these devotees bowing down and offering incense and other kinds of offerings to the stupa and other structures, as well as a narrative drawing of the Shibi Jataka, the previous birth story, in which the Bodhisattva gives a piece of his own flesh being weighed against the life of a small bird, a kapota, a dove, in order to save the dove, which he holds here in his lap, from a hawk, from a predator. So just quickly, what is remarkable about Shatial is not only the elaborate triptych, but also the distribution of inscriptions, because what we see here is that most of the inscriptions are actually Iranian inscriptions in Sogdian, Bactrian, and Parthian, with a large number, hundreds actually, of Brahmi inscriptions and some Kharoshti and Proto-Sharda inscriptions as well. So this is actually, because there's over 1,000 inscriptions, or almost 1,100 inscriptions here. This is actually like 20% of the entire epigraphical corpus of the Upper Indus graffiti. The longest one in Sogdian, here translated by Nicholas Sims Williams, evokes the plea of a Sogdian visitor to see his brother and to safely reach Tashkorgan from the spirit of the holy place or sacred place cart. So as noted by Gerard Fussmann, who suggests that Shatial was a religious shrine visited by Buddhist pilgrims to worship and gain merit, as well as non-Buddhist Sogdian and other merchants who came there to guarantee the efficacy of their journeys through difficult terrain. Okay, so I'm going to end my show and tell with this image of a point cloud, which which can be generated for kind of navigating around Shatial, like we saw in the fly-through video for sites between Chilas 6 and Chilas 2. And then I will also show you a drone video too, which is kind of cool as a way to kind of end my talk. Okay. I won't talk about the way we're integrating the 3D models with the additions of the graffiti. That would take a little bit more time than I have. But what I'd like to say is that applying the digital imaging techniques to Upper Indus sites with concentrations of petroglyphs and inscriptions opens new perspectives for understanding Shatial and other nodal points in the regional network where names and drawings of Iranian, Indian, and other travelers and local donors provide visual and written evidence of multiple linguistic, religious, and cultural backgrounds. According to the standard model of diffusion, Buddhist missionaries gradually spread the Dharma, spread the Buddha's teachings, beyond South Asia to Central Asia, and eventually to China by moving from one center to another along the major trade and travel routes. This process was termed contact expansion by Eric Zorker, whose book on the Buddhist conquest of China was published in 1959, but in the later stages of his career, he revisited some of these assumptions of a diffusion-based model, and because he recognized that that contact expansion by diffusion does not adequately explain the early stages of Chinese Buddhism. And this is because while there is evidence of Chinese Buddhist communities, oftentimes led by foreigners in the Chinese capitals of Luoyang and Pengcheng in the first couple of centuries CE, the transit zone of Eastern Central Asia in what's now Xinjiang remained what he called a Buddhological vacuum without archaeological evidence of residential monasteries or stupas until around 250 CE. So in order to account for the late appearance of Buddhist institutions in the Tarim Basin, Zorka proposed that it remained a transit zone until economic conditions provided the requisite surplus for supporting residential monasteries. He juxtaposed the model of diffusion by contact expansion to an alternative theory of long distance transmission in order to clarify the kind of uneven patterns in the cross-cultural movement of Buddhism to China. So this alternative paradigm of long-distance transmission also applies, I think, to the transit zone of the Upper Indus in northern Pakistan. There are Chinese literary references to regional shrines and monasteries, but these oftentimes raise more questions than answers. So briefly, maybe I'll move on from this. And here's some acknowledgement of the funding agencies and the collaborators involved in the project, like the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, because Shatial is located in that province rather than Gilgit-Baltistan. So very briefly, there is a reference by Faxian, and also who came in the 5th century, and in the early 5th century, and also Xuanzang, who reported a large image of Maitreya made out of wood that was venerated in the 7th century. Okay. So in conclusion, uneven patterns of cross-cultural contact and interactions in regional transit zones of the Upper Indus in northern Pakistan deviate from paradigms of gradual diffusion. Graffiti, petroglyphs, and other written documents reflect patterns of religious and cultural mobility. The writing and images drawn on the rocks at epigraphic and petroglyphic complexes by local inhabitants and pre-modern wayfarers who chose their own itineraries based on religious, commercial, political, and environmental conditions show us that there was no single way to go, that they had a choice of several different itineraries via a network of nodal points joined by capillary routes. So I think that concludes my talk for the history seminar. And I want to thank you all very much for your patience.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving such an enlightening talk on this topic. And now I would like to ask Seema Baba ma'am to please give her comments on the same.
Thank you. Professor Neelis. I'm just so wrapped up in all the information and the analysis that you've just given of these very important sites. And they reverberate so much with many of us because we've grown up on a lot of our ancestors or my grandfather, moving around freely in this zone of Gilgit and Hunza and traveling in these zones. So obviously they were very much part of our cultural landscape, because not only for pilgrimage, but also for other cultural reasons. For example, tonsering the head for Mundan ceremony. A lot of families would go into these places because these were the places they identified with. So, just to, and pushing it back 2000 years or more is a very interesting way of connecting all the roots which have become so distant from us today. So that cultural landscape is being evoked by your talk, so which is very, very important for me as somebody who's lived in that area or in Western Himalayas, at least I'm associated with that. Before opening up the questions, as the chair, I will grab the opportunity to ask a few questions, if I may. One that, the kind of landscape that you showed was very moraneous. So there's a lot of moraine that I can see. And within this, to find petroglyphs or for people to just stop and carve out all these markers. Are these markers or are these graffiti, which is just to show they were there? Because sometimes it says arrived. Or are these, what else do they function as? Because it's so moraneous that sometimes you would overlook it when you're going and not noticing what is happening. So that is one question which I thought I would have, I would like to know more about that. Now, the names also, now the kind of stupa that I saw on the Chilas bridge of Kuber Vahana with the Vyagari Jataka, that one, it seems to have developed into the Chotan. Is there any connection with the Chotans later, that come up in that Ladakh area, which I was something that it just something that I saw some kind of a similarity with. I'll allow other people to ask questions, and if there are no more and we still have time, I'll ask you the rest of my questions later.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, and also for the observation about more recent mobilities through the cultural landscapes of these Western Himalaya, Karakoram, and Hindu Kush mountains. One thing I could add to that is that nowadays there's a booming domestic tourism industry in Pakistan, right? Because now people have, cars. There's improvements to not only the Karakoram highway, but also another highway going over the Babusar Pass. And so it's attracted a kind of, modern day tourism that, is for sightseeing, like going to see the snowy mountains right in the middle of the summer. But I think there's a yearning to know more about, what these images and what these writings on the rocks mean. And so not only local inhabitants, but Pakistani tourists and potentially international cultural tourists will be asking these questions. Why are people writing their names on the rocks and drawing these images? Oftentimes, not only the fabulous stupas, like the one that accompanies the Vyagri Jataka or the triptych at Shatial, but even just more, rudimentary symbols that are connected with their identities at these places. So I think what's important to understand are what I'm beginning to see is that each place has its own kind of distinct character. Some of these places could have had multiple functions, like the site at Shatial, where which belonged to a kind of triangular network of long distance trade by Sogdian merchants between, say, their homelands in Western Central Asia, in what's now, say, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and the Upper Indus, and their and also with the Tarim Basin extending as far as Dunhuang and the Chinese capital of Luoyang, where we find the Sogdian letters, Sogdian tombs, and so forth. But Shatial was not only a place of commerce. Even in one of the Sogdian inscriptions, it's referred to as the holy place, the sacred place cart. So as the French scholar Gerard Fusbon noticed, religion and commerce are a good mixture. They make a good ménage, so that at a place like Shatial, it could have been both a shrine and a trading post. Other places could have very well functioned as both wayside shrines and places where hunters could branch off and go up into the mountains in search of, wild game, like the ibex, right? Other sites are located near very old villages, which record the names of local people, like a scribe named Bita, who showed his ability to write inscriptions in both Brahmi and Proto-Sharda. So I think oftentimes the function of these places was to serve multiple purposes.
Yeah.
And I think the last question you asked me was about the similarities between the stupa drawings and the kind of chortens that you still see either depicted on rocks or built into the environment in Ladakh. And yeah, this kind of affinity is and transformation of stupa architecture is reflected in the petroglyphs as well. So for example, at one site of Chalas 2, where we have the Ghandari graffiti, we see stupa types that have clearer affinities, say, with the Gandharan architecture, right? And you even see people, depicted in the petroglyphs circumambulating the stupas as well. And maybe I'll just show one more figure, one more slide real quick, which also shows this kind of linkage between the Gilgit region of northern Pakistan and say Ladakh and places further west in the further east in the Himalayas. And this is an image that is carved into the side of a rock face in the Karga Valley just outside of Gilgit. This is actually basically the Gilgit manuscripts are supposed to have been found in a kind of monastic library that was on the plateau above this rock carving. So this figure is, with especially the kind of trefoil niche, is very similar to the kind of similar niches that you'll see in Kashmir and Ladakh. And then I'll also mention that around this same time period, by the early 8th century CE, there was also an atelier supported by the Palola Shahi rulers, their families, and members of their court that led to the production of these kinds of exquisite bronze sculptures that have stylistic affinities with Kashmir and Tibet and so forth as well. Okay.
Yeah, great. If you can, Soumya,
Yes, ma'am.
take questions.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have a message from Parul ma'am as well. She says that, dear Professor Jason, thank you very much for sharing your intense research and incisive observations on capillary networks and important nodes along the way. These not only offer an important corrective to cultural diffusion theories in ancient and medieval trans-regional cross-cultural interactions, but also provoke us to look for alternative explanations in other areas of intra-Asian exchanges. I was reminded of Eric's thesis that the spread of Buddhism from South Asia to China resulted from long-distance transmissions rather than contact expansion. If I recall correctly, Professor Tansen Sen also refers to it. Thank you also for evoking Professor Bhairavi Sahu's research so meaningfully on the day when we have all been remembering him and his contributions with a deep sense of loss. With regards, Parul ma'am.
Oh, I'm very grateful to Professor Dar's generous comment, and which Soumya has kindly conveyed to us. Yeah, as I was preparing this talk, I was wondering, how to relate Professor Bhairavi Sahu's contributions to scholarship to my topic. And what I realized was that there was actually an important match between what he's written oftentimes about uneven regional patterns and Zorker's thesis of long distance transmission. I think there's an overlap, and I wasn't really able to clearly explain this in my conclusion, because a diffusion-based model really assumes that there is an even distribution of culture, which spreads from one point to the other in a gradual way that ensures continuity and conformity to visual and other patterns of ideas that are expressed in literary transmission, and to some extent also in terms of the material and written culture as well. However, that pattern of evenness is disturbed by what we find not only on the ground at these sites of everyday writing and images, but also when we look carefully at the earliest stages in the literary transmission of Buddhist texts. It's not as if there is one collection or one version of a text that gets repeated over and over and over and over again in Ghandari manuscripts, or the earliest Chinese translations of Buddhist literature. Instead, it's very uneven. across regions of ancient Gandhara, of early China. And I think that that insight can be applied more broadly, as Professor Parul Pandyadar points out, to other kinds of trans-regional and cross-cultural interactions in South Asia, but also in Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and East Asia as well. So in other words, the norm is not one of continuity, until we get to a kind of later phase, where, yeah, there's a regularization of like, this is the canonical collection. This is what you'll find in every single Buddhist monastery according to the ordination lineage, whether it's the ordination lineage of the Theravada tradition or the Mulasarvastivadins and so forth. But that's not the, but really the norm is one of deviation rather than conformity. So I hope I'm making the point I wanted to get to clearer now.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And now I would request everyone in the meeting, if anyone has any question or comment or any doubt, please mute themselves and you can ask the question yourself to Professor Jason. Arijit?
Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
So, thank you, Professor Neelis, for your wonderful and very enriching talk. I had just one, sort of a comment, I should say, not really a question. Do you get some inferences in the Gandhari manuscripts of Aryasur's Jatak Mala, since you talked about Vyagri? So it ring a bell on my mind that, whether it got reflected in that. And then another thing is that since the Vyagri Jataka in itself, idealizes the ideal of self-sacrifice, which is obviously a paramita, then what do the patrons were thinking? Were they thinking as the ones who thought in Ajanta of, pertaining the qualities of a good, virtuous ruler, or just, getting a merit as per se? I hope I made myself clear. Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, very clear. Thank you for these questions that were sparked by the images of not only the Vyagri Jataka, but also the Shibi Jataka in the triptych at Shatial. Both of them, are among the limited number of petroglyphs depicting Jatakas or previous birth stories. So I really appreciate your question about the link with the Ghandari manuscripts, because that was my research project with a team of collaborators, both textualists and art historians, before I was able to return to the Upper Indus region to work on this current project. So it's very interesting, actually, because in the Ghandari manuscripts that belong to the British Library collection, there are labeled genres of stories called Purva Yogas and Avadanas. And these have been edited, are being edited by my collaborator and friend, Timothy Lenz. 2 volumes of these stories have appeared in the series for Gandharan Buddhist texts. These are scholarly editions, but there's also a more accessible treatment of these stories by Richard Solomon that's been published in a book on the Buddhist literature of ancient Gandhara just in 2018. So Purva Yogas literally means something like the linkages to what is previous, the purvas, that is to say the previous lives. Those show a kind of early stage of kind of the standard model where there is a story of the present that gets linked to a story of, a past birth, a Purva Yoga, right? But with the Avadanas, there's not really any karmic link that's emphasized. These are more just like edifying stories that only concern the life of the present. And these can be, present characters from the context of first century Gandhara, because there are references to Shaka, or Indus-Scythian figures like Zadamitra, Karaosta, Ashpavarman, who's also known from Apracha coins and inscriptions. The Prachas were a local dynasty. But there's also other stories about, say, Ashoka, and figures from the time of the Buddha as well, like the maidservant Puniga or Puna, right? So my point is that at this stage of transmission of Buddhist stories of previous births, we don't find them labeled as jatakas in Ghandari manuscripts. Instead, they are secondary summaries that are written oftentimes below the main text on the front side of the scroll, and then the scribe flips the scroll over and continues to write in whatever space remain in the space on the back too. What's interesting about these stories then is that they don't have direct parallels, direct literary parallels oftentimes. These are original compositions. So they reflect a kind of more vernacular style of Ghandari than the kind of translationese style of the main type sutra or commentary type text that that you find as the main text on the scrolls. So over the past 7 years or so that we've been doing the research on the stories in the Ghandari manuscripts and conducting a kind of global survey of images of so-called jatakas in Gandharan art, what becomes apparent is that the stories that are transmitted visually are different from those that are summarized in the extant Ghandari manuscripts. There's only one story that appears in both media, and that is the ubiquitous story of Prince Vishvantara, who gives everything away. In Ghandari versions in the Purva Yoga series, he's called Sudashna, which is interesting, as I'll talk about in a talk that I'll give in April next month. This matches or doesn't match, but anyway, it's similar to the name of the main character in Sogdian and in Chinese versions of the story of the prince who gives everything away. So what does that mean then, in terms of your other question about these motifs of self-sacrifice, the paramita, or perfection of giving, or dana? Well, I think, and what does it mean, especially not only for the patrons of the images like Kubera Vahana at Chalas Bridge, but also the patrons of these stories that are written down in manuscript form. And I think the key is understanding that there is an upholding of the value of donation, of giving. So I think the idea is that if these extremes of sacrificing one's own body can be done by exemplary bodhisattvas whose paths one might want to follow, then certainly you, as a donor or as a visitor to these wayside shrines, can give something up too. A small donation, right? To not only to ensure safe passage, right? In a mundane way, safe crossing of these rivers, which turn into incredible torrents, right? During the summer when the snow up in the mountains melt, or in a more profound way as a passage from this life to the next, across the sea of samsara, or to the far shore of nirvana. So I think that these motifs, although they may seem like simple drawings, simple stories of jatakas, there's a lot of meaning and value embedded in them as well that motivated people to follow not only these pathways belonging to these kind of capillary routes, but also to embark on other paths that then get elaborated in very detailed ways for seeking ultimate aims.
Thank you, Professor Jason. And if anyone else has any question or comment to make, please unmute themselves. Okay, if there's no more question, I would like Seema ma'am to please grab this opportunity and ask any questions if she wants, or
Yeah, hi. I think we have 2 more minutes. So I don't think I will be asking more questions, though I have many, many more, especially about the kind of routes that on which these graffitis were found, whether we can actually, the capillary networks can be mapped in any cohesive and coherent form. And that's something that really interests me, because I've been trying to do that with Shankalipi all over North India, and the pilgrimage and networks with Shankalipi. And, you can see certain footprints, so to speak, of the sadhus and the munis and the traveling people, sacred sites also. So if there are any parallels, very briefly, if I can ask you that, to that here.
Yeah, no, Shankalipi is very interesting. And it kind of remains a sort of holy grail for Indian epigraphers because it has not yet been adequately deciphered. But you'll see examples of it, right? For in the Himalayas. I've seen it in Rajgir and other places in northern and central India as well. And to me, Shankalipi, even if it hasn't been deciphered, it still shares this quality of having a special kind of efficacy when it's written on different types of surfaces. Okay, so there aren't that many examples of the Shankalipi in the Upper Indus, although I can think of a few more calligraphic examples where Brahmi approaches something that's starting to look like Shankalipi. This is there are a few inscriptions that were set up in Chilas, and these refer to figures with like royal titles too. So it's really intriguing. But I think that my former professor, supervisor of my PhD, Richard Solomon, he picked up Shankalipi, I think, when he was first starting his academic career and doing research in India. So maybe and we've been asking him over the years, so what do you think Shankalipi is? Has there been any significant progress towards its decipherment? So I'm hoping to keep asking him.
Yeah. We're also looking forward to any kind of decipherment, but at least their presence tells us that they were, Shankalipi was important and was used as a means of communication during a particular window in the history of.
I wonder if Shankalipi was functioning in some ways like these petroglyphs, in the sense that it was kind of marking someone's presence and connecting them to this kind of larger network of writings with some kind of deep cultural significance that has also an aesthetic dimension. Because oftentimes when we look at most Indian inscriptions, we don't think of them as being calligraphic in the same way as Arabic or Chinese calligraphy. But when you look harder and more carefully, you do see that there is some significant attention to the way that writing looks. And when we look at this corpus of graffiti, and here I'm using graffiti not in a pejorative sense, but more in like a scholarly sense of like graffiti, whether it's written on pots or on rocks, it tells us something, right? And in this sense, then graffiti can be compared to the rock drawings in the sense that both of them visually express identity and mark one's presence at a place.
Absolutely. So with that, I would like to thank Professor Neelis for sparing so much time and giving us such a detailed talk on capillary networks in the Upper Indus Valley, and especially for paying homage to Professor Sahu, who was very, very dear to all of us. And really, this was fascinating talk. Razi, would you like to?
This was so interesting, and so much technology needed to be deployed for noting down all the details. And what 2,000, 3,000 years of carvings and inscriptions. This is really very, very fascinating, and the 3D digital image analysis, etc., that you are talking about will perhaps will be of much use to experts, and perhaps for general general people also need to be educated in terms of long distance appreciation of things happening across regions, etc. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for making these arrangements. And I'll just say that although I did not know Professor Bhairavi Sahu myself, giving this talk gave me an opportunity to engage with his intellectual legacy, which will surely live on, not only at Delhi University, but among other students and scholars of early Indian history.
Thank you so much, sir.
And please do stay tuned for more developments as we figure out how to show the digital modeling in a more accessible manner, so that you won't have to worry about me sharing screens all the time.
On behalf of the seminar committee of the Department of History, I would like to thank you for coming here and enlightening us with your research. And I would like to announce the next week's talk now. We have on 16th March, that is Wednesday at 3:30 p.m., Professor Swadhin Sen, and he will be talking on archaeology of the medieval and the settlement patterns and processes in Bangladesh, rethinking hegemonic discourses. So I want everyone to be there as well, please. Thank you so much.
And it seems that Dr. Swadhin Sen is also going to connect his work with Professor Sahu's work on settlement patterns and inscriptions, and the study of a region in relation to larger conversations of different regions as well. So it will be a good show perhaps again next week.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.